Hey everyone, I'm the Rev. In this video, we're going to go through every GT3 car and every GTE car in LeMans Ultimate. Maybe you're a beginner, maybe you just haven't tried every one of the cars, but I'm going to drive them all and I'm going to tell you which one I found to be the best for the beginner and which one I found to be the best for me overall. So without any messing, let's get into the GTEs. We'll head to Fuji and we'll start with the Porsche 911 RSR. So for this test, like when I tested the hypercars, we're on the same track, in the same conditions, so that we can get a good feel for how the cars compare to one another. So let's start by saying that as of the time of making this video, I've got roughly 280 hours, shall we say, in Assetto Corsa Competizione, and my god have I tried to learn to drive the Porsche in that game, but I can't. I just can't handle it, it doesn't suit me at all. So how does the Porsche feel in LeMans Ultimate? Well, what did I write down after a stint in the Porsche round Fuji? Well, I've written one of the best Porsches I've driven. Once I'd adapted my driving style to it, I found it quite manageable. Now, I've got a habit, be it good or bad, of when the car starts to understeer, I'll tap the brakes, get the weight onto the front and try and get those front tyres to grip to sort of drag me into the corner. That's not something you can do in these Porsches. All the weight is at the rear of the car, so as soon as I tap the brakes to get the weight onto the front, the whole of the car's engine throws itself onto the front, the rear goes super light and I'll lose the rear. So I had to adapt my driving style to the Porsche, but once I'd done that, I was relatively happy with it. I've wrote that the car was good through fast corners, but ever so slightly unsettled through the slower stuff. Now this last sector here at Fuji, if you want to test a car's stability, under braking and turning, this is the sector to do it in. This is one of the hardest sectors in sim racing for me. Under braking there, you can just see I had to correct the car, I just lost the rear ever so slightly under braking on the weight transfer and I lost myself a little bit of time. But it was manageable, and overall I felt this Porsche was much more stable than the car in, say, Assetto Corsa Competizione. But what was the all-important lap time going to be for our first lap in the GTEs at Fuji? As you can see, we didn't do a personal best sector 1, but we did do a personal best sector 2, and the lap time being a 1:39.790, and I was happy to be under 1 minute 40. Overall, I would definitely recommend this Porsche. Let's jump in to the Aston Martin. So straight away in this drivetrain, the Rev feels more at home. It's a front-engined, rear-wheel drive car, and I'd just say that that's my preference. It's probably the drivetrain that I've spent the most time in, so I'm the most comfortable with it. So what did I write down after a stint in the Aston Martin? Well, it took around 2 laps to get the tyres to come up to temperature, but once they were up to temperature, I was happy to push on. I have written down, considering it was a front-engine car, it didn't have the best front end. I felt like the turning was a little bit lethargic coming from the Porsche, so that didn't suit me, as well as some of the other front-engine cars that I've driven. In terms of throttle application, you had to be really smooth on the throttle in the Aston Martin. It was very easy to spin the car, especially when the tyres were cold, but once the tyres were up to temperature, it became a bit more manageable. I did knock the traction control up 1. That just gave me that little bit more confidence that the rear end was going to stick. As you can see there, done my personal best first sector and well up on this lap of a 1 minute and 49. We come now through the slow corners into the last sector. This is always going to be the test on this track, and it would be this sector where I would gain or lose the most time, and it's also the sector where I'd make the most mistakes. The car, I would say, felt really light as you brake and turned into the left-hander. You can see there I just get a snap that I have to correct on throttle application. I just didn't have huge confidence in the rear of the car, and I always thought that there could possibly be a mistake in there and quite an easy spin if I got it wrong. But what was the all-important lap time going to be? As we fly now to cross the line at Fuji, we've done a personal best sector 1 and a personal best sector 2 and 3 for a 1 minute 39.694. Not a bad lap. Let's jump into the Ferrari. Now I'll start by saying that this is the car I've done the most laps in. This is the car that I was using for the daily race at Fuji in the GTE class, so I was very familiar with the Ferrari GTE around the Fuji circuit, so I was expecting to be relatively quick in it. I had initially been using the Aston Martin, what with it being front engine rear wheel drive, but I jumped into the Ferrari to give it a try, even though it's mid engine rear wheel drive, which don't normally suit me, but I found that this Ferrari did very much so. So what did I write down after my stint in the Ferrari? It's great on the brakes, that's for the start off. Really feels good, it's difficult to lock it up even without the ABS. So I felt the braking was very, very good. I could brake late and I had really good control. I really felt that the gearing was good on the Ferrari too. The gearing's really long, there's loads of revs, you can hold the gear for a long time, which I think helps with the stability as you're not constantly going up and down the gearbox. So in the slow, last sector at Fuji, I really felt that helped too. As we head down now towards the chicane, as you can see, over the curbs, the car was really settled, it was easy to get on the throttle and have some nice traction. And as we come into the final sector, I really felt that the car had good balance. It had a good nose so you could turn it in nice and tight, but on the brakes here now, as we turn in, there's not a big snap on the steering wheel. I did run a little bit wide, but that was driver error, it had nothing to do with the car. So as we come now round the final corner, we've got a personal best sector 1 and a personal best sector 2, and hopefully this should be a decent lap as we cross the line at Fuji. As I say, this is the car I'd used in the daily races. I'd done the most laps in it, so I was expecting to be a bit quicker than in the Aston and the Porsche. So we crossed the line with a 1:39.408, and that's our fastest lap so far, and it was a great car to drive. Let's jump into the Corvette. So this is the last of the GTE cars, but it's last but not least, what did I write down after a stint in the Corvette? Well, I've written mega stable, so it must be good because I wrote it twice. It feels stable on the brakes, it's got a really good sharp turning, and it's got good straight line speed. Sometimes you can jump into a car and feel instantly at home. Within a couple of corners you think, oh yeah, I like this. And the car just instantly gives you confidence, which allows you to push on. Well, the Corvette was definitely one of those cars. I can't say that I was expecting it to be. It's another mid-engined rear-wheel drive, so it doesn't normally suit my driving style, but I really enjoyed it and I really felt at home with it here on LeMans Ultimate. It was really predictable, it was easy to drive, and you could start to wind that pace on in a relatively short amount of time. The brake pedal had a really good feel to it, and I wasn't having any issues locking the car up, so we had confidence on the brakes going into the tight, slow corners here at Fuji. We're going to see a great example of the braking and the stability of the car as we come into the chicane. I could take loads of curb, I could get on the throttle nice and early. It turned in and changed direction really well, and it was lovely and stable. It was absolutely brilliant. Coming down to the trickiest corner on the track, onto the brakes, I could trail it in, get off the brakes late, which allowed me to brake that little bit later. It was lovely and stable through the corner, and you could carry some good speed into the final turn. The rears hooked up nicely, and we rocketed out to the final corner. So with some good traction, we head towards the line here at Fuji, and what is the lap time going to be? Would we be able to beat the Ferrari? Maybe, let's find out. It's a 1:39.560, just a tenth off the Ferrari, which had been using all week, so I was confident I could go much faster in the Corvette, given a bit more practice. So overall, what did I make of the GTE car class on LeMans Ultimate? I thought it was fantastic. I enjoyed each and every car, they felt different to one another, and they were great to drive. Overall, the Corvette was my pick for the best car for me, and the best car for the beginner. I might have gone a little bit faster in the Ferrari, but that's the car that I've been driving all week, so I expected that. Given a bit more time, I would definitely go faster in the Corvette. So if you're a beginner in the GT class, the Corvette's the car to drive. So with the GT class out the way, let's move on to the GT3s. For the GT3 class, we've come to Bahrain, as that's this week's GT3 daily race. And what better place to start in the GT3 class than in the McLaren, the one car that you get for free in this class on LeMans Ultimate. So I thought that we'd start here. So it's worth noting that as it's a GT3 car, it has anti-lock brakes. The GTE class does not have anti-lock brakes, so that's a massive difference coming from that class to this class. However, I did feel that the training that I had in the GTE class of not locking the car up actually helped me with my braking in the GT3 class. I found that I was able to not overuse the ABS in the GT3s due to being a bit more gentle on the pedal, having just driven the GTEs. But back to the job in hand, how does this McLaren 720S feel? Well, it feels great. It's a mid-engined rear-wheel drive car, and it certainly feels mid-engined. It's got a decent amount of balance, and it's got good brakes. I found that it was quite quick, and it does like to slide a little bit on the brakes, but it was pretty manageable. The tyres warmed up pretty quickly. I think I had them up to temperature within 2 laps, and then once that temperature came in, you could feel the grip and you could start to build your confidence with the McLaren. I know I've mentioned it in prior videos, but I think it's worth mentioning here. On LeMans Ultimate, I find that at slow speeds, I just have to balance the car. So when I come off the brakes, I need to be on the throttle immediately. There can't be a big gap. I need to get on the throttle, and I'm only talking a small amount, 5, 10, 15%, just to balance the car. Otherwise, it's really easy to lose the rear. So it's well worth remembering that when you're off the brakes, you need to be back on the throttle at low speeds, and that'll help you to guide the car through the low speed corners. I certainly felt that this McLaren was a great place to start in the GT3 class on LeMans Ultimate, and I think as a free car you can have no complaints. It feels good, it's relatively easy to drive, it's nice and stable, and you can find some lap time with it if you're willing to push it. As we head now to the finish line, what's the lap time going to be? It's a 2 minute and 1.524. Overall, a great car. Let's jump in to the Ferrari. So I would say that it's fair to say that the GT3 Ferrari 296 is one of the most popular GT3 cars. On the likes of Assetto Corsa Competizione, for example, if you jump online, you'll always find a huge number of Ferrari 296 drivers. It's very popular, and it's popular with good reason. It's a good car. But how does it feel here on LeMans Ultimate? The first thing that I wrote down was that it felt alive. I'd say that it certainly feels pointier than the McLaren straight away. Jumping straight from the McLaren into the Ferrari, this car has definitely got a pointier front end. Some may like that, some might not. For me, it suits me a bit better, as I can control a little bit more what the front's doing, especially in the braking zone. The brakes themselves were really good. I didn't have any issue locking up. Obviously the ABS helps, but I wasn't over-activating the ABS, for example. I felt that the braking was really responsive, it had good bite, and I was able to brake relatively late. Now, on a side note, before the tyres were up to temperature, I did feel that the car was really easy to spin, so I wouldn't be pushing this car until I really had confidence in the rear tyres. So for example, in the first couple of laps of a race, I'd probably be a bit more tentative in this car as I got the tyres up to temperature. Once I was happy with it, that's when I'd start to push. As we head now to the final sector at Bahrain, I think this is where you can really feel how stable a car is at high speeds. This car, the 296, it's got great grip. As we throw it in now to this right-hander, you can really feel the front left weight up, and you can feel the limit of the grip. It's a fantastic feeling that the LeMans Ultimate does really well. Overall, the Ferrari 296 was a great car, really enjoyable, sounds great too, and obviously being a big Ferrari fan, it certainly hit all the right notes with me. Coming straight from the McLaren into the Ferrari certainly feels more on edge. Some may like that, some may prefer the dialed back nature of the McLaren. But for me, the 296 was the more fun to drive, and I was about to go a little bit quicker than I did in the McLaren. With a 2 minute and 1.421, that was our fastest lap in the Ferrari. Let's jump in to the BMW. This one was going to be interesting. This is my go-to car on Assetto Corsa Competizione. I find it stable, predictable and quick, and I enjoy driving it there. So it was going to be a real test to see what it was like on LeMans Ultimate in comparison to Assetto Corsa Competizione. The first thing that's different is as soon as you touch that brake pedal. The ABS feeling from LeMans Ultimate is absolutely fantastic. These brakes, they had great bite. I was able to brake late, I could trail brake really well, and I wasn't over activating the anti-lock brake system. As you can see from the steering wheel, it's not juddering left to right when I'm on the brakes. The feeling on the brake pedal was absolutely fantastic in this BMW. So overall, I was really impressed straight away. It only took a lap or two to get the tyres up to temperature, so that was good, as I feel that at the beginning of the race I might be more likely to push this car a little bit harder than I would the McLaren or the Ferrari, which we drove previously. It's great on the traction and it has fantastic turning, as you would expect from a front-engined rear-wheel drive car. Overall, just like an Assetto Corsa Competizione, this car felt planted and it felt predictable, and when you're after consistency like I am, I need that predictability. I need to be able to know what the car's going to do lap after lap and it not shock and surprise me out of nowhere. I don't have the skill to catch those surprises every time. It's a handful of times I can catch them, and then the other handful of times I lose it. So for consistency, the BMW was the car for me. It felt fantastic there through the fast right-hander, feeling the front tyre load up. It had a great front end with loads of confidence. Really good car. With one final car to go in the GT3 category, the Corvette was going to have to be really good to beat this BMW. This was my favourite car so far. As I say, I'd use this online, I'd use this to help me with my consistency. But as we steam now down the start-finish straight, what was the lap time going to be in the BMW? It was a 2 minutes and 1.360. Great car. Let's move on to the Corvette. So if you remember, my pick of the GTEs was the Corvette. I stated that sometimes you can jump into a car and you can just feel instantly at home and you can think, oh yeah, I do like this. This is very nice. Well, this Corvette was the complete opposite. I couldn't stand this car. It was completely unenjoyable. The gears were too short. It was quick, but it felt lethargic to turn in. It felt a bit heavier and it was just less responsive. In terms of the throttle, well, that was pretty good to be fair. You could put the power down quite easily, you wasn't going to lose the rear, and the tyres did warm up quite quickly. I'd say it was stable, definitely stable. I didn't feel like I was going to lose it, but I just felt like it wouldn't really do what I wanted it to do. It wasn't responding to my inputs as well as the Ferrari did, for example. It just didn't have that sharpness, it didn't have that pointy nose. It just wasn't a particularly great car. Obviously it's mid-engined rear-wheel drive, so I know, as stated, doesn't suit my driving style, so it could be me. You may get in the Corvette and absolutely fly, but in terms of my enjoyment, this was not the car for me. It's also worth noting that it took me 4 laps to warm the tyres up, so that's double the time it took me to warm the tyres up in every other car. I don't know what it was, but I just could not get the tyres to warm up. I did write down that the brakes were just okay. I didn't feel like they had a good bite like the BMWs, and I certainly didn't feel like I could push on into the braking zone with them. They were just okay. I have managed a purple first sector and a decent second sector, so it's not like the car was slow. It wasn't slow. I just found it forgettable and unenjoyable. It's just not the car for me. I may have been going as fast as I did in the other cars, but I wasn't enjoying it as much, and as I do the sim racing for the enjoyment, this wouldn't be the car that I would pick. And I also think that for the beginner, due to the amount of time it takes the tyres to warm up, that wouldn't be a particularly good experience for the beginner either. They'd feel that they had no grip for a long time, so I wouldn't choose it as a beginner. So what's the lap time in the Corvette? It's a 2 minute 01.643, so roughly the same as we did in the other cars, but I just didn't enjoy it half as much. So after driving all the GT3 cars available today in LeMans Ultimate, what's my pick for the beginner? Well, without a shadow of a doubt, it's the front-engined, rear-wheel drive BMW M4 GT3. It's planted, it's predictable, and it's fast. It doesn't take long to warm the tyres up, which means the beginner will get a bit of a better feeling for the car in a shorter amount of time. So for me, it would be the BMW M4 GT3, followed closely by the McLaren, which is great news as that car's free. I do hope you've enjoyed this look at the GTE and GT3 cars in LeMans Ultimate. I thoroughly enjoyed making the video. I'm absolutely loving this game at the minute. I think it's brilliant. Say what you will about the pricing, which is all over the place if you ask me, so that's not perfect. But the actual game, I can't complain about at all. As always, I've been the Reverend. Thank you very much for watching.